Okay, so we are in lesson 7 of the Foundation series. This is part 2. So lesson 7 was so big, I had to break it up a little bit. But last time, we looked at day 4, and where God had appointed the sun, the moon, the stars to serve his purpose. And we saw the heavenly lights. Even though they were rulers, God made them rulers, they weren't gods. They are servants under God. And that repeated the message. One of the messages that repeats over and over in Genesis 1, and that is that creation does not explain itself. We've seen that in light and darkness, the seas, the skies, the land, the vegetation, the sun, the moon, and the stars, God speaks and creation obeys. That's just the way it works. Now we're coming to days 5 and 6. These are the days when God fills the waters, the skies he fills up the land, and all of it is with living creatures at this point. That has not happened yet. So at the high point of Genesis 1, God creates mankind in his image. So let's go start at verse 20, Genesis chapter 1, verse 20. Then God said, "Let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens." So life doesn't appear because lifeless matter suddenly or slowly figures out how to become alive. That's what we're taught, right? No, Genesis begins with the living God speaking life into the world. And the waters are commanded to abound. Almost anywhere you go, you can throw a fishing pole or net in, and there's something abounding in that water, right? So the skies are filled with birds. The firmament, the same firmament that divided the waters from the waters on day 2, now is the realm where the birds fly. And so the pattern continues. On day 2, God formed the sky and the seas, and 3 days later, he fills the sky and the seas. Verse 21 says, "So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good." So this is the first time, kind of words matter in these things. This is the first time since Genesis 1:1 that the word created again appears in the chapter. That kind of caught my attention. So the living world is not treated as an ordinary thing or accidental. God creates the creatures of the sea. He creates the birds of the air. All of it's by his command. He speaks and they come. And the abundance and variety is incredible. The waters are not barely populated. If you've ever been out in a boat on the ocean, on a cruise or a trip, sometimes just a lake is huge. It's like, when is this going to end? But it's so full of water. The earth is so full of water, yet God filled creation, filled the waters with that. Now, some are tiny little creatures. They're very small, and some of them are huge. Some of them move in weird ways. We think of fishes the way they swim in an orderly fashion, or in schools, and then others just are zigzag here and there. It's all kinds of weird things that we think. But just God's wisdom and creativity in creating all that is captured in what we see in the living creatures, especially in the sea. I think that's probably the most variety that we see. And the verse specifically mentions something, great sea creatures. Now that doesn't mean they were frightening, like they were monsters in the sense that, we think of sea monsters. But before sin entered the world, God looked at everything and we saw that he called it very good. And these great sea creatures were part of that creation. I can imagine that. Some of them were just huge, great in size. Some of them still are. And they're strong. They're great in beauty. They're great in the wonder that they stirred up in the hearts of people and the eyes of people that saw them. And I don't know how far Adam and Eve got from where they're created or originally how close that was to the sea where they had the Garden of Eden. But I can imagine that they were just in awe at what God had created in the sea. But then later, obviously this was all filled with God's blessing at the beginning there and his observation that's good. And then after sin entered the world And then later on, the flood and the great fountains, everything was broken up in the earth and the deep. It created the order after the flood of a world that will be affected in a lot of ways that we'll study in the future lessons. But in Genesis 1, we're not looking at that fallen world, that violent world. Sea creatures and creatures eating other creatures. That just wasn't part of their diet. The Bible tells us. It tells us what they're eating, and it doesn't say that there was death. And that death entered the world through our sin, through mankind's sin. So we're looking at God's good world filled with living creatures according to his original design. So one other thing I noticed in this verse here, these verses, it keeps saying according to their kind. That's so important, according to their kind. It doesn't give us all the modern biological terminology that we see today. It doesn't have categories, species, families. There's something started with genre, not genres, but there's another. I didn't write it down. I should have written it down. the categories that they put under, but there is something that's built in to every creature, and there are reproductive boundaries. One kind does not mate with another kind. They reproduce within themselves. A kind is always within that kind. And I'm going to give this out later on. It's really cool. It shows a lot of the different, just a few samples of the different kinds of creatures. We'll go over that if we have a little time. But one of the examples I will mention, it's kind of like a family grouping. A kind is. And it's good to understand that, because when you understand that, then you understand more about the scriptures that are to come. A dog kind would include such animals as wolves and coyotes and jackals and foxes and dingoes, and then the domestic dogs. Now, these are not all the same species, but they all belong to the same kind. They reproduce within that kind. And the original created kind, and then later on the ark, the pair that was brought together to be saved on Noah's ark, everything we have today comes from those two. All the genetic information was in there originally. There was nothing added to it. I mean, for all of scientific knowledge, it just doesn't happen. You don't have DNA extend by 10%, or new data is put over on this side and taken away from that side. That just doesn't happen in DNA. No, we're all made, and all the animals and all the sea creatures and all the birds were made with those genetic boundaries. And so when scientists look at these species and families, they're not exactly what a kind is, but most of the time you can infer by the look, the style, the way the animals are built. Okay, this animal has a long tail, or has a tail. This animal doesn't have a tail. Okay, the animal's not going to just suddenly grow a tail from nothing, for no reason. It doesn't evolve a tail. So I hope that helps with understanding the after its own kind. And it also helps us understand things about extinction. Now, people hear that species go extinct. They may think, the entire created kind has been wiped off the planet. They've all disappeared. But a species is much narrower than what the biblical kind is. Species loss is real. That does happen. I was going to see if I don't think I made a note, but they estimate between a few hundred and several thousand species are lost every year. They're gone extinct every year. That's a lot, but they think that's what the scientists say. So the species is generally variations within those kinds. This particular species, and I'm not going to go into those particular species, but you can look them up. But you'll see that those are subcategories of a kind. It might be a particular bird species, but the primary bird that species came from, that kind, is still there. The characteristics, just maybe the coloration or the shape of the beak or something else about that bird that it was adapted through through genetics changed. And then that particular style went out of style. That also helps us understand when we talk about what we now call dinosaurs. Are dinosaurs in the Bible, y'all? Yeah, we're going to read about it in just a moment. They were created on day 6 alongside man, or right before man. But we shouldn't assume that every extinct species represents a separate kind. I'm trying to think. Many varieties are within each broader kind, just as we talked about the jackals and the wolves and the domestic dogs. Show variety within the dog kind that fits in all kinds of things. Dinosaurs that we talk about, we think of large, huge animals. Most of them were no bigger than cows, and even smaller. There's a lot of them they say were like chicken size, and now they weren't birds, okay? And nowadays they're saying that they're birds, but they were birds. No, there's nothing that shows anything that shows a dinosaur growing wings and starting to fly. That just never happened. So, but there are species that have gone extinct. A lot of species have gone extinct. A lot of new species have come up. And that's simply because they're a variety. My wife, she changed species a little bit because she had this coat of dark brown hair, and suddenly it became kind of salt and pepper hair. And now the kids are trying to pay hundreds of dollars to get that hairstyle. So it's one of those preferred styles. But that's a little minor example, okay? I'm not saying she's a different species, okay? Mitzi, no, that's not what I'm saying. But that's, there's an adaptation for the environment you're in, and that does happen. Now, the variety within the species, Darwin was right in some of his thinking that there are adaptations that happen and changes within a kind to adapt to where they're at on the planet and what their environment is and what their predators are, where they're at. But that cardinal, I think it was cardinals that he studied a lot, they're never gonna just turn into a fish and swim away. That's not gonna happen. So all that to say, Genesis presents fruitfulness, not biological confusion. Life has that design and continuity within the boundaries that God set, and they don't go out of it. Living things reproduce according to God's created order. So, and we never see, we don't see, and we can't, we really don't see in science either, that one kind slowly becomes another kind through some unguided natural process. That just does not happen. In nature, it doesn't happen, and the Bible doesn't say anything about it either. It presents that God created living creatures according to their kinds. Verse 22 says, "And God blessed them. Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." I like that. God's talking to these creatures. Just keep that in mind. God is talking to the creatures. There's a communication there. So, a little deeper, this is the first time the word blessed is used in the Bible. How many of y'all are blessed? This is the first time we see blessed. God blesses the living creatures with fruitfulness. He commands them to multiply. He fills the world not only with life, but then he blesses them so they can continue that life through reproduction. Verse 23, "So the evening and the morning were the 5th day." Again, we see the pattern repeating. Evening, morning, day 5. Genesis is still moving through the same week of creation. Now we come to day 6. Verse 24 says, "Then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so." Again, we see the pattern repeated itself. Day 3, God caused the dry land to appear. Day 6, 3 days later, he fills the land with living creatures. Verse 25 continues, "And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good." Again, we see according to its kind. It's according to its kind. It's not accidental. God is emphasizing the order that he put in the created world. Now, the living world is not a blur. It is structured by God. It's not random. It is structured by God. And God saw that it was good. He said, land animals are good. The sea creatures are good. The birds are good. Creation is not God, but creation is good because God made it good. And it points to him. So, again, we talk about this, but again, God's emphasizing this. We have a biblical balance here. We don't bow down and worship creation, but we receive the natural order as God's handiwork. He did this. So we don't despise it either. You know, you have, I'd love to see y'all's refrigerators, especially with several grandchildren, because I'm sure you've got pictures up there that if I walked in the door, I would not recognize what that is. But you'd say, oh no, that's a picture of me. My grandson drew it. I'm not gonna ask how many of y'all have that, but I'm sure you do. But no, you don't despise something that someone else created that you love. And so we know that creation is something that God created, our earth and our planets, our everything. And you know, we love God and he loves us. We're not going to despise it and mistreat it. Okay? It's a little environmental impact statement there. And although it doesn't rule us. You know, some people make it a religion. That's kind of worshiping it when you let it rule you. But no, but we take care of it. That's what God said to do. Also reminds us that, again, God doesn't give us a laboratory manual in Genesis, but it does give us the kind of world that science makes sense. So that ordered, non-chaotic world that one lawgiver gave can be studied and learned from, and we can take care of it as well. Now, when God says in Genesis that he made creatures according to their kinds, that's the order. When he says he fills the seas and the skies and the land, it shows purpose for these things. When God calls it good, it reflects the wisdom and goodness of its maker. And we see that pattern all through God's creation, all through God's work. Okay? The order, the purpose, and the wisdom and goodness of our Creator. Those are things to observe because we see it from the very beginning. Now, the next verse, the pace changes a bit. In verse 26, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Now, that's different than everything that came before. He didn't say, let there be man. Notice that? No, he said, let us make man in our image and according to our likeness. And there's a solemnity here. There's a respect of some sort here. This is something special we're going to do. This is a creature on the earth that, you know, he's the Father. You wonder who us are: Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Bible backs that up dozens of times. So, you know, he's like, this is something we're making special. This is not just another animal. He's made from the earth, but he's more than the animals. He's made in the likeness and image of God. Now, image, the word image points to a representation. These are people that are created or made represent God. Likeness reinforces the idea of resemblance or correspondence. And so we see, you know, God's creative mind. No, does he have a physical mind? No. or God's, you know, strong, mighty arm, or the handiwork of his fingers. We see those kind of things. Or he sits on his throne. Those are not physical features of God, but with mankind, he created things that helps us to see the picture of God's strength, his wisdom, his authority. And again, it doesn't mean that this all doesn't mean because we're in his image and likeness doesn't mean we're divine. Came across someone the other day. It's in a cult. He wasn't knocking on my door, but I'll just give you a hint. His first name used to be Elder, but I was talking about something else. But he, you know, in their religion, well, we're all just trying to be like Jesus. Why? So we can be God too. That's their thought process. That's what they teach. And that's not at all what the scripture is saying. The image and likeness of God is not saying we are God or we can become God. It means mankind is uniquely qualified to reflect God's character, to represent his authority, to relate to him personally. Animals can't relate to God. It just doesn't happen. Birds and fish can't relate to God the way mankind can. And we can rule responsibly the creation that God has put us in under his authority because we are in his image and in his likeness. We couldn't do that if we weren't in his image and likeness. So, human beings can hear God, they can know God, they can respond to God, they can obey God. Unfortunately, they can disobey God. They can worship God. They can reason morally. Where do you get morality from? You can reason morally because you're in the image and likeness of God. You can exercise dominion. You can speak truth. You can speak love. You can be creative. You can steward. And you can give account. And we have to give an account to our Creator. Those are all things that are very unique to mankind that you don't see. I mean, we see animals have life, but mankind has life and image bearing. That's a huge addition. It's incredible. And that's one of the most foundational truths that we have in Scripture. Human dignity, it doesn't begin with a government. The Declaration of Independence does not confer upon us human dignity and rights. No, it's recognizing the rights and the dignity that God gave mankind. It doesn't begin with ability or age. It actually is not even related to intelligence or productivity or ethnicity, skin tone, the culture you came from or that you've adopted, or even your money, or even your health or wealth. Human dignity begins with God. If man is made in the image of God, every human life has value because every human life is connected to the Creator's design. Who's expendable in this world? Baby you can't see because they haven't been born yet? Someone that's not like you? Someone that thinks different than you? Someone that is persecuting you for righteousness' sake. They're disobeying God. They are actively going against what God has commanded. Is that someone whose life is not worth keeping? No. The Bible says no. We all have the same dignity and value. That's why Christians, and we're pretty unique about this, Christians love and want to help others even when they are being attacked and persecuted by them. I can't tell you how many times you've seen we've seen where people that were captured and tortured for Christ and persecuted, they prayed for and they loved their captors. And many times the captors came to Christ. We see that in the Bible. The prison breaks open. The guy is about to kill himself because he's responsible for these prisoners. And the disciples are saying, no, don't kill yourself. You have value to God. You can be saved too. That was an enemy. That was the relationship. But no, God allows us to have that love for them. Let's keep going. Verse 26 says, let them have, this is mankind, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So that is dominion. That is domination. Domination means delegated authority under God for the purpose he has. It's our responsibility. It is the responsibility that mankind has been given to rule, to govern, to manage, and steward the created world. And that's mankind's job as God's image bearers. Now, it's not a permission to abuse creation. And that's the authority. Whenever you get authority for somebody, you also have accountability to the person that gave you that authority. Because the world still belongs to God, even if it's been put in our care for a while. God placed the world with our responsibility to live under it, under the created order. Now, we're not above God, we're not equal to God, but we are under God and over the works of his hands. And we read, we studied in Hebrews about how we also are going to have that authority over the heavenly created beings in eternity in God's perfect plan. Psalm 8 also reflects the truth. It says, "What is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him?" Then David also says, "You have made him to have dominion over the work of your hands. You have put all things under his feet." Now, y'all know what the word all means in the original Greek? All. It means all, okay? So when you come to that word all, it means everything. It means all. Genesis 1 turns this into worship in our lives. The man is small, yes, compared with the heavens, but he's not insignificant. The stars are vast, but the stars are not made in the image of God. They're just something he was playing with. He created for our enjoyment and for the purposes of what he set them for, and Genesis tells us that. Now, let's go back into a counter theory, because you can't help it. When you're in this passage, you can't help but talk about the evolutionary story from time to time. Ruling the earth belongs to whatever creature dominated by its size or strength or speed, maybe how strong its teeth were, or how powerful its claws were, or maybe a survival advantage. But Genesis gives us a different foundation. How many of y'all ever heard, 60, 100 million years ago, dinosaurs ruled the earth? Dinosaurs never, ever ruled the earth. And if you go back in that same thought process, just for the fun of it, sometime Google, what ruled the earth before dinosaurs? There's all kinds of weird things they have about that. But that's what they have to have. Something ruled the earth. Well, we know what rules the earth. God was given to man dominion, okay? Dominion is not given to the biggest animal, the fiercest animal, the fastest animal in the woods, or the one that can hide the best. It's given to man because man and woman are made in the image of God. Animals are marvelous. Well, at least they were when they started, when God first made them. There's still some nice animals around. I mean, you especially when you got cats and dogs. Everybody, you're a cat person, you're a dog person. You don't like either one. You like your bird, your parakeet, your lizard. Arnold the pig on Green Acres. There's everybody's got. They're cute. They're adorable beings, and if they're in God's creation, they're meant to be companions and helpers for mankind. But they are not given dominion, even in their perfected state that they were made in. They were not given God's image. Okay, verse 27 summarizes it, and it says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them." And that's one of the clearest statements we have about human identity in the Bible. The last few decades, they're talking about your identity. How do you identify? Well, God created man in his own image, and that image bearing includes both male and female. Now, listen to this, especially all of the guys. Where are all the guys tonight? There's a couple of us here. Now, the verse doesn't say that the male bears God's image and the female is secondary. You catch that? No, both of them. In the image of God, he created him. It says he created him. That him is kind of a generic word for third person human. And it says male and female, he created them. Male and female were not accidents. They're not social inventions. They're not something you choose. Whenever you feel like changing, you change. No, they are not social inventions. They are part of God's creation, very specifically. And that means that in the Bible, identity is not a self-created or self-chosen item. It's received as a gift from the Creator. That's awesome. Our culture increasingly is telling people, look inside yourself and maybe even reinvent who you are or change who you are. Genesis tells us to look to God to see what he made, who he made, receive what he gives us, who he made us to be. And it's only when you have that your life can be fulfilled. Now, it doesn't mean that every question is easy. You know, you might have some struggles in certain areas. Fallen mankind have struggles in a lot of different areas, and that is one of them. They're confused. People are confused. But if they're told, you're not confused, you're just in the wrong body, suddenly they become even more confused. They think they found the answer, and then they realize that wasn't the answer. And, well, what is the answer? You got to tell them the truth. Male and female, he created them in God's image. That's God's starting point. And then verse 28 continues. It says, then God blessed them. You remember, he just blessed the animals and the other creatures. Then God blessed them, the humans. And God said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. You know, he blesses mankind in a way very similar to how he blessed the sea creatures and birds, but the command here is fuller. You notice what he added? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Okay? That's often called the creation mandate. God gave mankind a calling to this way before sin entered the world. And the work is that we do. Some people say, oh, I loved it. Well, it'd be great when I get to heaven. I'll get to rest and never do any work again. You got the wrong concept of heaven, brothers and sisters, if that's what you're thinking. No. Work is, there's work, responsibility, fruitfulness, dominion. All of that is God planned, and it's blessing. It's wonderful to be able to do. And yet, we see later on, human sin corrupted work. It corrupted relationships. It corrupted even our dominion over the earth. It corrupted fruitfulness. And nowadays, there's many voices telling us, don't be fruitful and multiply. That's directly against God's word. We know one famous person that is no longer with us, went to heaven in October. He would tell the young people, get married and have a family, have lots of kids. That's exactly what God said. He wasn't doing anything new. He was just saying what God told us to do. Get married, have lots of kids. God didn't invent, God didn't invent getting tired from work. I'll just put it that way. He didn't invent getting tired from work. Sin didn't invent work and responsibility and those things. God created mankind with purpose from the very beginning. Verse 28 continued, it says, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Again, dominion is repeated. You might say, well, I've heard that before. In fact, you said it a few minutes ago. Well, God said it in the last verse or a few verses ago. He's emphasizing this because it gives meaning to what we do. It gives meaning to our work. Farming and building, naming things, organizing them, learning, creating, governing, caring for the animals, raising children, forming homes, households, developing skills. These are not meaningless human activities that we just kind of grew as a habit because we're different than. No, this is what God created us for, God's purpose under his creation. And the problem is not that people are seeking purpose in life. The problem is that they're seeking a purpose in life while separating themselves from God. When you're created for a purpose and you separate yourself from the Creator, it's really hard to find a purpose in life. And if you reject, especially if you reject what the Creator has given you, we're not here by accident. We're not owned by ourselves, I'm not self-owned. No, we're not self-defined. We are created by God with Him in His image, with a purpose and responsible to Him. And he continues in verse 29 of Genesis 1 and says, and God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seeds. To you it shall be for food. What did man, Adam and Eve eat? It says right there. Everything was growing up out of the ground. And then at verse 30, also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food. And it was so. So, did the animals eat each other? according to the Bible, that wasn't their food. No, God provided food for mankind and provided food for the animals. God who commands is also the God who provides for us. Now, before sin enters the world, Genesis presents this entire creation, the original creation, as a world full of life and provision and space. There's lots of space on the earth. No, we're not overrunning the planet. What is this? Someone said you could fit everybody on the planet inside Jacksonville, Florida, if you put them all there. It'd be a little tight squeeze, but everybody could fit geographically there. So we are not, we are not in too small a space. In fact, the New Jerusalem is 1,500 miles. We think of it as a cube. I think of it as a cube because it's 1,500 miles wide, 1,500 miles deep, 1,500 miles tall. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a cube shape. It could be, that's just when you measure it from all those dimensions, it sounds pretty cool to me. But anyway, Genesis presents that life, provision, space and order, and nothing in the scriptures that we see here show us or present anything or even suggest that there was death, that there was bloodshed, that there was violence of any kind, that there was predators, that there was that animals were carnivorous, or that people were carnivorous, eating meat, or survival of the fittest. None of that is shown up as God's original design. And that's going to be really important as we get into the next chapters, or a couple chapters in the fall. And we see that Genesis ends with world declared very good. Death later on, okay, so we understand it well. Death is an intruder that comes into the world connected to sin. This is not the way that God used to create animals and mankind. One animal didn't die, or they didn't go through millions of years, thousands of years, tens of days, whatever, of a cycle of dying and reproducing and killing others. And that all didn't happen for man to be what it is, for animals to be what they are. No, he spoke and he created and he made them. Let's keep going. Verse 31. Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. I like it. He said good several times. This was good, that was good. And now he's looking at the whole thing. This is very good. This is very good. Remember in the New Testament when someone came to Jesus and said, good teacher. And they said, what do you call me good teacher? There's none good but God. He didn't even say very good, but God was God could be proud, right? He can do that. He was very proud of his work. This is very good. This is basically, I think he's just like, man, I've outdone myself, Of course, he was the only one doing it, so the only God that's there. So this is the world. We see this incredible world that is made before sin entered, ordered, fruitful, purposeful, and very good. And that's why Genesis 1 here is so foundational. It tells us who God is, what the world is, what life is, how it came about, what mankind is, why human work and dignity and male and female, the role, the way that's set up between the two of them, both of them bear the image of God, and the authority that they have has to be understood. All of this has to be understood as under God. Otherwise, we lose. If you lose Genesis, you lose these concepts. You don't lose just a debate with somebody that's saying, that couldn't have happened. No, you lose the foundation of understanding reality. You have no foundation for reality. And even people that say they don't believe in God, their foundation for reality is the same as ours. It's the same. They just don't know it. Is it moral? Morality is a big thing. Where's the authority? Male and female. Why do male and female work? All these things. So you've got to understand that these foundations are foundational. So don't, someone says, well, those are nice stories, but I believe in Jesus. We'll get to that. It's different. You can't say that. You can't throw out Genesis and still believe in Jesus because he fixed what went wrong in Genesis. So Genesis does not stand apart from Christ. The same Christ through whom all things were made, as John starts to reveal, and as some of the other New Testament passages tell us, the same Christ that came to earth as a man was also in creation. He made it all, and he came back to redeem the fallen sinners. Colossians 1:16-17 says, "For by him, Christ, all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible." It also says, "He is before all things, and in him all things consist." So if Christ wasn't there, nothing would even hold together, is what it's saying. The Creator came. He didn't just make it and then abandon it. No, the one who gave blessings, the one who continues to give blessings, came back, came on this planet as a human to restore his fallen image bearers. You are an image bearer. How many of y'all bear the image of God? Yeah, all of you. Yeah, no matter how ugly I can be, I'm still bearing that image of God. And a little corrupted in there, over what the sin that's come in the world, but I still have that image that God has put in each one of us. So, Jesus' death and resurrection is extremely relevant to all of this. So Genesis 1 doesn't just give us information about the beginning, it gives us the foundation for everything: worship, identity, responsibility, the hope we have in Christ. And days 5 and 6, I hope you all enjoyed seeing how God's putting all this together. God's filling the world with life that he had just created a few days earlier. The waters are teeming, the skies are filled with birds, the land's bringing forth living creatures, and then God creates us in his image, blessing us, giving authority and dominion, and we've given up some of that. Okay, got to admit it. We gave that up when we gave it over to the enemy of our soul. But he wants to put us back where we belong. And that's where the lesson lands. God made it, filled it, ordered it, blessed it, and called it very good. God saw everything he had made, and indeed, it was very good. So I hope this helps out. It's gonna get better. We got a lot of good stuff ahead in this series.